Hello, I'm Martin Milton. I'm Professor of Counselling Psychology at Regent's University London, and I'm a contributor to the new Handbook of Counselling Psychology. In that handbook, I've written a chapter that looks at ecopsychology. It looks at ecopsychology for what it is. It looks at the relationship between ecopsychology and counselling psychology now, and in it as well, I'm also thinking about potential relationships, ways in which an alliance between ecopsychology and counselling psychology could prove very fruitful, both in the consulting room and also in tackling some of the wider problems that we're facing at the moment. So what is ecopsychology? Well, it's an interesting area. It's a newly forming, it's a burgeoning area. It's influenced by a range of disciplines, and I'll say a little bit about that in a moment. But fundamentally, ecopsychology is interested in the relationship between humanity, the environment, and nature. Unlike much psychological theorising, it wants to look at this in a very wide relational way. It questions and it challenges, as does counselling psychology, this kind of unidirectional function, this unidirectional focus that much psychological work has got. So we're not just interested in how does variable X affect people, how does variable Y affect people, but it's looking at loops of influence, the way in which we affect the world affects us, and so on and so on. Ecopsychology has a wide range of theoretical, intellectual and philosophical roots. It draws on disparate disciplines, shamanism and deep ecology on the one hand, climate science, environmental psychology and conservation psychology on the other. Equally, a range of people are involved in the ecopsychology field. Practitioners from clinical psychology and counselling psychology are taking these ideas and working with them in the consulting room and outside of the consulting room. But so are wilderness workers, so are people that are expert in offering nature-based interventions. They're all contributing to this growing field. So ecopsychology overlaps with counselling psychology. It overlaps in that they're both interested in a holistic and relational perspective. It overlaps because both fields are interested in the ways in which we thrive and the ways in which we suffer, whether that be us as individuals or us in the context in which we live. And I think ecopsychology has a lot to offer the practicing counselling psychologist, whether that be just an increasing use of the ecological dimension in our clinic-based work, or whether it's to allow us the frameworks and the templates and the confidence actually to take the client and work outside in nature, where some of this becomes incredibly relevant and incredibly useful. Now, having said that, I think it's time to move on and look at some of the domain-specific contributions that ecopsychology is making, and for that, we need to move out to the ocean. There's been a lot of research done on people's relationship to water, whether that be the oceans, whether that be rivers, streams, or lakes. Where the research seems to be agreeing is that we do really well. Our well-being is very much enhanced in relation to water. Some of the fields looking at this come from economics all the way through to physiology. We're looking at brainwaves, we're looking at expressed sense of contentment. Researchers in the field have come up with the concept of blue mind to explain and to describe some of the experiences that we're now beginning to see. Blue mind captures that quality of a calmer, more enhanced sense of well-being, and obviously it's very different to that kind of red mist that we get used to on a pretty regular basis in our stressed, fast-paced urban environments. Okay, it's not all about water though. There are other places that are very good for us. We're off to see some of them now. When you look at the literature, a couple of the key themes that come up about the bush, about wilderness, about remoteness, are psychological well-being, and equally importantly, a sense of profound insignificance. And that seems to be something that does wonders for people, and something that we struggle a great deal with in our urban environments. So of course, nature isn't just the stuff of David Attenborough documentaries. But it's all around us, our gardens, our parks, our urban landscapes. We are, after all, what McFarlane thinks of as explorers of the undiscovered country of the nearby, affected by what's hidden in plain sight. Maybe we sometimes forget that connecting with nature, or at least trying to experience nature, isn't always a case of a long journey to some far-off, distant, remote place. Parks, gardens, even schoolyards can offer some contact with nature and allow young people and adults alike the chance to experience at least the imaginings of a connection which can be the beginning of something much bigger. For many of us, one way we connect with nature and our place in it is in zoos. In some respects, you can see people, young and old, finding just a short period of time to encounter something wild, and safely wild. In some ways, the conservation and eco-psychological agendas overlap here, but zoos, of course, are controversial. As well as the issues of keeping animals in captivities, zoos can't offer real contact with pure, unadulterated nature. They are, and they have to be, heavily managed, and they may actually feed into the discourse about humanity's expectations and their right to control and use aspects of nature just because we can. For this final segment, I've come to Richmond Park, one of London's many easily accessible green and wilder spaces. And what I want to do in this segment is just to say a little bit, not so much about theory and concepts and ideas, but about how this makes a difference to practice. Is there a therapeutic dimension to counselling psychology and eco-psychology having an overlap? And there is. I think already from what I've said, you can see that even if we stay in our consulting rooms, thinking about these things can already make a difference. We can add to our repertoire. Instead of just asking what are the human relationships like for our clients, we can also just stop for a moment and think about what relationship does the client have to the natural world? Does it mean anything to them? And if it does, what? What associations come up for them? Where are they in relation to it? And is it something that's meaningful and important? But as well as that, therapists are also taking information from this whole field and making adaptations to their practice. They're actually bringing therapy outside into the wilderness, or outside into the green spaces at least. Some people, they just bring the traditional talking therapy, so that they're outside, they sit somewhere comfortably under a tree, somewhere quiet, somewhere not too populated. They undertake talking therapy in a way very similar to they might do in the consulting room. People are taking it further though. They're also thinking about what advantages there are and what different practices can happen. And you also see people doing a kind of a walk and talk kind of therapy. One advantage of this, of course, is, as many people will know, is that when you're trying to grapple with some of the most distressing things in your world, it can actually be, while it can be very positive, it can also be quite intimidating to have someone sat opposite you, looking at you, witnessing this. Whereas the walk and talk means there's a different type of relationship between the client and the therapist. You're side by side. You're walking through the environment. The pace is different. The kinds of associations are different too. And then, of course, and here I think there's a whole new innovative world to be thought about. We should also turn our attention to what the nature-based specialists can bring. People that run vision quests, people that run retreats, people that run solos. We should learn with them, and maybe, as well as learning something, counselling psychology will find that it has a contribution to make in helping understand this or offering some compensatory practices too. So I think that's all I've got to say in this video. Obviously I hope that some of this has meant something to you, and that I do very much hope that if you've got the Handbook of Counselling Psychology, that you will look at the chapter I've written. And if you want to follow up any of the theory, any of the practice, do look at the references. There's some really useful and some very interesting reads in there that can really kind of point you in the right direction. And I do hope that you end up rethinking the landscape in which you work and having a very productive time. Thanks a lot.